It is the News Roundup, where we discuss the region's top stories of the week. And joining us this week in studio, Laura Reckford, editor at the Barnstable Enterprise. Morning, Laura.
Morning, Mindy.
And joining us from the Cape Cod Times newsroom, Sean Gonzalez, news columnist with the Times. Morning, Sean.
Hey, Mindy. Good morning.
And we're going to start with primary results. And the big upset of the day was the 2nd Barnstable District, where 14-year incumbent Demetrius Atlas was defeated by his Democratic challenger, Brian Mannal. This took a lot of people by surprise.
It took a lot of people by surprise, including myself. I spoke to Brian Mannal throughout the campaign, and he was working really hard, and I always would hear him ask people, if they thought he had a shot, and these kind of things, and people were telling him it's going to be very difficult. Demetrius Atlas comes from a well-known, well-connected family in the Hyannis area, a very likable family, in fact. And but Brian got out there and worked really hard. What I find is interesting is this race actually there weren't a lot of contested races, but this race actually got a little nasty at times, and which is tough in a smaller town where people are coaching in the same leagues and come across one another quite a bit, supporters as well. And but Brian Mannal was able to garner 2,058 votes, which was about 56% of the folks who were casting ballots in that primary contest. Demetrius got 1,621, which is 44%. And as you mentioned, he's been the district representative for 14 years. One of the things that became a bone of contention in this race, Brian Mannal, if folks hadn't really followed, he was actually, worked on the campaign of George Bush in 2000. He switched to the Democratic Party because he became very uncomfortable, he said, with the GOP's social stances on social issues, particularly with regards to gay marriage and so forth. And at one point in the race, they were sort of really trying to compete to say, who was more who was the bigger Democrat. Now, of course, Atlas in some quarters sort of, has a reputation of where people sometimes say, "You're a Democrat, really?" Some of his, pieces of legislation he submitted, like things that you would more associate with GOP candidates, things like the Stand Your Ground law and things of that nature. And yet, both of them ended up really, vying for Democratic voters' hearts and minds here in this race, and Brian Mannal came out on top, and he was shocked. I actually saw him last night at Gringo's, where him and his wife and his family and supporters were celebrating, and he acknowledged sincerely that he truly was shocked. He worked hard. He knew that he worked hard, but was really surprised, I think, because a lot of people, had been telling him, you're going to have a difficult time unseating
an incumbent is a tough thing to do.
Well, this was really a stunning turn of events. I mean, when he arrived at Gringo's and his supporters were already there, and I was there, and he walked forward and he was sort of saying, well, I don't think I'm going to embarrass myself. We did okay in a couple of precincts. That's all he knew. This was about 8:30, and the restaurant's telephone rang. And they said it was for him. And he went over, and I followed him inside the restaurant, took a picture of him on the phone, because who gets a call at a restaurant these days? And so I thought this might be something important. Well, it turns out it was Mr. Atlas conceding the race. Yeah. And no one was more surprised than Mr. Mannal, who sort of took the news and was very sort of blown away by it, came out and announced it to his supporters who were there, his family. There were a lot of whoops and yells and hugs. And he just frankly said, I'm very humbled by this. He had no idea. Yeah. And so Mr. Atlas had broken the news to him. And it was earlier in the day, the big news had been in Precinct 5 in Osterville, which is considered the most Republican district of Barnstable's 13 precincts. And what had happened there is a man, a Republican actually, who was a supporter of Mr. Mannal's, had put together a write-in campaign for Mr. Mannal, where he was giving out stickers, giving them to Republicans to put on the Republican ballot. Now, there was no one on the Republican ballot in this district race. And so if Mr. Mannal had gotten 150 of those little write-in stickers, he would de facto be the Republican person on the ballot in November. Very unusual thing Mr. Atzelis found out about, called the town clerk, Linda Hutchenreiter, and said, is this legal? She called the Secretary of State, and he said, yes, in fact, it is legal, and someone else is doing it, in fact, in another town in Massachusetts, this race. But Mr. Mannal, as soon as he found out about it, he said he called that man and anyone who was participating in this. He said he had nothing to do with it. He said if he was elected that way, he would not serve. He said he would not run as a Republican. He kept emphasizing, as Sean said, that he was in fact far left of Mr. Atzelis and very proud of being a Democrat, and said he would certainly not run as a Republican, and even with the ability to switch once, if he had been elected as a Republican, he could have switched. He said he wouldn't do it. He absolutely would not do that. But that had everyone really abuzz.
And of course, there's no, as you said, no Republican challenger. So Brian Mannal becomes the next rep for the 2nd Barnstable District.
That's right. So he's the de facto winner, and Mr. Atzelis conceded that and said it's been a great 14 years. And both men were gracious last night with the results, but I think both very, very surprised about it.
Yeah. And then, of course, we had Senate President Therese Murray had